Sir Anthony, can I ask if you think that what Clare has described, particularly something like a 5-week placement, would pass your tests of, did you say it was trivium, which is the grammar, logic, rhetoric? In other words, facts, interrogate them, and then do some construction or presentation.
Yes.
Is that the same process when you push people out to give them live experience? Or is it, I mean, because there seems to be a mismatch in language, and yet I hear people wishing for the same kind of engagement. Is that?
Well, I think that is a vast question, and we must ask ourselves, is higher education just about preparation for work, or is it about preparation for life, and is it about helping people to understand the richness of the world's scientific and technological and cultural and political economic systems? And I do think it should be about both. So I am in favour of work experience at school. It was often the case with many students that when they got out and started applying what they had been studying, that it came real. I think the best teachers make the material real anyway, even in class, but I think work experience is invaluable. But I wouldn't want to see universities just becoming job training centres. Life is extraordinary, and some of us live to work, some of us work to live. I think we should all be studying to live and to learn how to become ever deeper, ever more engaged, ever less bored, ever more enthralled by life, ever more fulfilling one's journey. As Thoreau said, I know it's on the tip of your tongue to quote Thoreau at this point, but Thoreau said most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and go to their graves with their songs still inside them. As we all know, he said that. You know, and if we just have HEIs which are training people for jobs without liberating those inner songs, I mean, don't put your hands up. Just everyone ask yourself, those of you who went to uni or those of you who left school, are you a deeper, don't answer, are you a deeper, more curious, more empathetic person than you were when you left? And because it's very simple in life, there are two directions. We either travel towards greater depth and humanity and I think joy, though a lot of pain comes with it too, or we just become more and more work obsessed. I mean, how boring to be with somebody who's endlessly talking about their work, even dinner parties on Saturday evening. They're just desperate to tell you how marvellous they are and what deal they've just done. Sad, sad, sad. So you know, so I mean, I think that's really answered. University should be about a great opening out.
Okay. I'll come back on some of that later on. But right, so David Sweeney of HEFCE, well-grounded Scotsman, brought up in Aberdeen. We've heard
like him.
We've heard quite a lot about, you know, the disconnect between universities and business. What Sir Anthony has raised is actually the disconnect that most university marketing people worry about, which is if students ever begin to suspect that universities will not deliver happiness and begin to question their purpose. At which point there might be significant change in student choice. So I use a different language, but I actually recognise quite a lot in what he is saying, and it is coming out in the folklore at the moment. So that seems to be quite a big existential crisis for universities on both directions, even though they are prospering at the moment, and people are struggling with these. You're not here to defend universities and things, but you have a robust place in all these. What's your thoughts on what you've heard?
Well, I don't think we should think about existential crisis. I do think we should think about challenges. Sir Anthony has certainly raised a number of challenges about the quality of our teaching, about the concern we have for our students, and any university that shrugs those off deserves Sir Anthony's epithet of complacency. Any university that indeed does get out of touch with its students and doesn't understand what they want are in the same place. But actually, as I go around the country, that's not really what I see. How many students did you say you placed in a year?
1,640.
Do you talk to them?
We talk to every single
Do
one
you
of
get
them.
feedback from them?
We get feedback from everyone.
That's much more of what I think there is going on. Of course, it doesn't happen all over the place. And I learned quite a long time ago that using PPE Oxford as the typical example of UK higher education got you into a few problems, actually. And I think that the main point I would pick up from both of our speakers is the diversity that, first of all, there is and that we need in the provision of UK higher education, but actually more particularly their diversity of need from our students. Sir Anthony talked about the private versus public university thing. Well, of course, the government has put a lot of money into public universities over 100 years or so, and the expectation is that that money has gone in with a responsibility to do things not just directly for their students, but for their communities and for the country and for the world. They are not expected to be self-glorifying organisations. The kind of concern that Clare just talked about for her local enterprise partnership is part of the public university deal. No choice, some money with it, but you're challenged to do it. For private universities, which I think enlarge what we do and are thoroughly beneficial, there is not that responsibility placed on them because we haven't given that level of investment. I think one of the questions for some universities, and actually for the University of Buckingham, is how much they want to engage in that full agenda, and I hope they will. I think, of course, alternate providers often do something different. They provide a distinctive form of higher education that may not be the kind of university degree that we know, but just from my very close observation in some cases, something that is of incredibly high value to students, but has got to be justified in the same way that Clare's work has got to be justified. So I'm for this diversity. I'm for the challenge of niche providers offering special provision. I don't think universities should be protected. So if that means your law courses are under threat from competitors, get on with it and work out how you can effectively deliver something that matches what they offer. I think we need to attend to that diversity. We need to think indeed about the intellectual underpinning, and perhaps we've seen from both of our speakers the need to balance the intellectual underpinning that equips you for the jobs not of now, but of 30 years to come. Sir Anthony's pointed out, I think, some of the things to think about there. But also the need to equip most students to go out and get a job when they qualify, in as much as we are able. And some universities have got brilliant things that they're doing, things that other universities say is impossible, too difficult, too expensive, but others do it. So I think there's lots to learn from looking at our universities, but we'll offer distinctive things. So diversity, but yeah, if you don't offer what your students want in some way, I mean...
We'll find out. Okay, questions and comments from the floor? You wanted to ask a question beforehand, or make a contribution. Just say where you're from.
I'm from Winchester University. I'm a second-year student currently. As someone that is very focused on the so-called soft skills, I do appreciate how important they are, as do some of my peers. But I feel that the responsibility of developing them fall more on myself rather than the university themselves. So I was just going to ask, how do you propose that I get more of these soft skills directly from university in that kind of contact time, rather than out on my own?
Okay, so let's take a few comments and then we'll come back. Anybody else? Okay, so Anthony, would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that it's easier to develop soft skills if one comes from certain types of background where there are opportunities to engage in conversations, to meet people from different professions than it is if one is brought up on a housing estate in a deprived area, and where the opportunities for conversations about economic subjects, financial subjects, scientific subjects are much less. So I think that we have to compensate for those who come from less advantaged backgrounds. I'm not making any judgment about your own background. So that we can give them those experiences. So you may have seen today in today's paper a number of schoolboys from a school near Windsor went off to the Kremlin to see Vladimir Putin, whether wisely or not, will be for others to decide. But that involves a kind of self-confidence, which I think have come perhaps less from the school and more from the backgrounds of those people. I think that schools and universities need to compensate for soft skills for those people who don't have the same degree of access. And if we look at why so many, if you're an employer, why people get preference from who've come from certain types of state schools and independent schools, is often because at interview they just seem to be more prepossessing, more confident. They look at in the eye of the person asking the questions. They talk in a more mature, less rushed way. And we need to give our young people these opportunities, not just so that they get the jobs in the first place, but that then when they get them, they can perform well. And of course, as we were saying earlier, it's much easier to teach somebody maths, which is pretty hard to teach somebody maths, but generally we know what we're doing more than soft skills. But nevertheless, it needs to be done in the world into which we're moving. Otherwise, we're just going forward complacently, and there's not the kind of leadership from university vice-chancellors that there can and should be, because they're all very comfortable, and they're driven by their heads of their professors who are very comfortable with courses as they are, and they get very irritated when you point out that things, and we hear, as we just heard there, that everything is actually marvellous in British universities.
Well, I think that's a bit tough on Joy Carter, who I think is a great leader of the University of Winchester. You want a specific suggestion? Winchester runs a student volunteering week in February. Great thing to do.
Joy, just as I wasn't mentioning Joy Carter, I was mentioning your experience of going around and thinking everything is fine in British universities. Things are not fine in British universities. The thing that's most wrong is that very attitude. Joy Carter is a wonderful Vice-Chancellor, and you have incredible people there. Perhaps the best person of all on education in Britain today is Guy Claxton, who spent much of his time at your university, whose thoughts about what education can and should be about are second to none.
Did I say everything was wonderful? Did I not say we had to face up to the challenges that you have just given, Sir Anthony, but we've got a strong base on which to build?
I agree.
I agree about that. I absolutely agree. I've got 4 kids who did 8 degrees at 6 universities. And in addition, I've worked myself for 17 years at a university. To suggest everything is perfect and wonderful, absolutely not. But we've got a strong base on which to build. The key thing, if the teaching excellence framework works, it will enable us to identify those areas of weakness and do something about them. That's, for me, the issue. We want to give a consistently great service to all students. From my kids' experience, they got a great time a lot of the time. But yes, consistency.
I agree.
Can I just ask a question, Sir Anthony? You mentioned that you would like to see university models that were closer to the United States model, and you were pessimistic about, whether the current private providers would be able to step up, whether in business, in other areas, and the way that the College of Humanities have been treated. But Mark Taylor from Eversheds this morning said that one of the interesting things was that he thought a number of serious, high brand recognition American universities were looking at the UK market and coming into it. What's the key feature of those university American models that would differentiate them from a UK model? And would you welcome it if they were stepping up and setting up more some of them have campuses here already, but more extensive arrangements? What is the differentiation you think is the key between their attitude and approach?
it's a broader undergraduate experience. That one reason why a number of undergraduates, not just from better off backgrounds, but the Sutton Trust, which you some may know, has been trying to encourage young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply to American universities, as an experience that the founder of the Sutton Trust, Peter Lampel, was very enamoured with when he was in the US. So it's a broader, often more liberal arts, studying less one subject, valuing sport, valuing artistic achievement. To me, it's very, running schools, it was very disheartening trying to encourage breadth, trying to encourage multiple intelligence learning when universities, for all their talk about valuing breadth, were only really interested in somebody's score at A-level, because if universities, as in America, were to do more to value the sacrifices young people make to keep going with the violin or keep going with netball when other people are getting Saturday jobs and not playing for teams, or other people are going off to cafes after school and not staying for orchestra practices. These things are very important for young people. So yeah.
Can I ask you, Sir Andy, because when universities have talked about contextual admissions, by which they mean taking factors into account other than A-levels, the first people to complain are your ex-colleagues, the public school headmasters, who say, we've trained our kids to get the best A-levels, and now you're accepting people with lesser qualifications. Now, I totally agree with you. We ought to look for students who have the opportunity, the potential to get reward from a broader university education. That means looking beyond A-levels. Will you tell your old colleagues that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I did, and I felt all the time that we needed to have much more looking at people's potential rather than just what they got, because clearly if you go to certain kinds of schools, you are much more likely to do well. I mean, somebody's A-level results are so much a function of the school that you attend and the motivation amongst the school population and the focus in that school and the level of expectation, aspiration. So clearly it needs to be broader, and clearly we need, because we have all these gifts and aptitudes, we are trying to educate young people for life, and the narrowing down of young people's experience, or the failure to open people up so they have their emotional side, their creative side, artistic side, cultural side opened up. You know, if you learn, it's very hard. I don't know how many here in the audience who have started playing the oboe or the violin after the age of 18. It's much harder to also start painting or start dancing. Ed Balls was an exception to that rule. but you know, it's much, you know, we need these things to happen at schools, and we need to value them and to say that they're important. And by the way, they won't cut against people's results. I think they'll help them. So that's another point that we agree.
Let's just take two quick comments and then we'll have to finish.
Okay, actually, it's a question. Maxine Taylor from King's College London. First of all, thanks to the panel for an absolutely fascinating discussion. But I think I came in from the private sector to higher education 5 years ago. So from very different range of backgrounds, from the public sector, from the voluntary sector, and literally from the private sector. And I think one of the things that strikes me most is that this is a sector that's really grappling with its identity. I think there are many, many dedicated people who really want to see change, but don't know quite how to make it happen quickly and in the right way. And I think the expectations of the outside world are getting higher and higher, and the wish to see speedier change is also being driven much more substantively outside by external commentators. So if I'm on the panel, I'd say to you all, if you were to do one single thing, and I'm bearing in mind Anthony's comment about government policy most probably won't work around diversification. It's one of the drivers, but it might not work. What is the one single thing that each of you would do prioritise above all else if you were a university vice-chancellor to make something change right now, and in a very substantive, radical way? So
write down your answers. A quick comment from Ray, and then we'll take the panels.
Thank you. Ray Land, Durham University. We quite rightly, I think, look to the States very often, to the US as an example of university excellence. But I think two correctives there. One is we tend to base that on the performance of universities in the world top 200. The American sector is an enormous one. There's a huge range of variability there. And even in that measure, you know, the UK scores pretty well. I mean, we, out of the top 20 universities in the latest rankings, the States had 12, we had 5. But two important things to take into account. The US has no national system, no professional standards framework for the preparation of teachers in higher education, as we have in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is the only state sector in the world that has a nationally agreed professional standards framework with teaching programs in each of the universities, I don't know about Buckingham, which are accredited against those standards. The European Union is now saying they should have a similar set of standards across Europe in the next 10 years. Ireland are trying to do that. So we are a world leader in that regard. More importantly, and the US has nothing like that, more importantly, there is now virtually no way of getting tenure in a major US university at the moment. There is a crisis, and I use that word advisedly, of casualization in the United States, of adjunct teachers, as they're called there, teaching assistants really, who are paid very little. They are very well qualified and have a couple of postdocs. They know they have no future as a permanent employee in those universities. It's known dismissively as adjunctivitis, which is a rather kind of sick joke. But if you speak to academic staff and their morale in the US at the moment, it is rock bottom.
Okay, Clare, one thing you would do if you were a Vice-Chancellor to change things?
I'm definitely not a Vice-Chancellor, but I think, I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think if you could do one thing, it would be to do things that focus on activities to encourage the passion to learn. Universities are full of really clever people, really interesting people, as we've heard, and we've listened to loads today. And there's lots of knowledge that are in universities that is completely impenetrable to the layperson. We're talking this archaic language, and it's not accessible to people. So to be able to find ways of unlocking that and for them to play with that, get to know themselves and get to know others, it will be something around that for me.
David?
I would learn from the British Olympic cycling team and the David Brailsford way of doing things, which is indeed not silver bullet and not baby out with bathwater. It's looking at every bit of your activity and looking for incremental improvement in every area. That's great, because the Vice-Chancellor can't do that. He's got, or she has got, to harness the skills of all of the leaders in the organisation, and that's the way I think you get organisational change in a university. And they've got to listen to a whole raft of reasonable criticisms of universities, some of which you might want to rebut, but I think some, and Sir Anthony has referred to several of them, you want to listen to and search every element of your structures, your courses, your student provision to see how you get improvement. David Brailsford rules.
Anthony?
I agree with both the previous speakers and uniting both the sense of personal responsibility so that the students but also the academics are capable of leading autonomous lives. And a lot of that comes down to leadership from the Vice-Chancellor. And if you have a Vice-Chancellor who's never seen, like some head teachers are never seen, and they have much, much smaller organisations to run, and don't transact the human skills. The role of the leader in setting the tone of the organisations is very important. And I think a big change we will see in the next 10 years is a rise in intelligent or smart well-being for both the staff and the students, so that they can live more fulfilled, autonomous lives, less dependent upon artificial and ultimately damaging ways to look at to quiet their mind and give them pleasure.
Okay, and on that note, I would like to ask you to thank all our speakers and contributors, and